The blank guestbook began writing while Ruth Bellamy was measuring it for a new binding. A bar of morning sunlight crossed the open leaf in the abandoned Fox and Lantern. Where the paper warmed, rust-colored letters surfaced one stroke at a time. Ruth moved the book into shade. The writing faded. Her cousin Ambrose had taken Bellamy Press after calling her only the binder. He left her this shuttered Northumberland coaching inn, together with a failing roof and an auction notice due in 10 days. Ruth had come to inventory doors, copper, and timber before creditors stripped the place. Instead, she carried the register to the kitchen and warmed a metal folder over one surviving coal. The tool revealed 6 names, followed by type sizes, dates, and sums paid in pence. All 6 people had been dismissed from Bellamy Press in 1856. The family story said they left after stealing type. Ruth knew one mark beside the names. She had seen it stamped beneath the pastedowns of her father's oldest books, where no customer would notice it. A floorboard creaked in the passage. The inn was supposed to be empty. Ruth closed the register and gripped the hot folder. Whoever had entered already knew which room she was in. The kitchen door eased inward. A tall man in a soot-black coat looked first at the table, then at Ruth. She recognized Silas Crewe, Ambrose's confidential clerk. He carried no valise and had brought no inventory sheets. "That tool will burn your hand," he said. "Then you should keep your distance." His eyes settled on the register. "Mr. Bellamy asked me to collect old business papers before the sale. This is my inn. Its papers stay here." Silas smiled without warmth. He had a narrow face and a habit of pinching his cuffs before telling a lie. Ruth had watched him do it over wage totals at the press. "The place secures a debt of £74, he said. "Possession is a generous word." He stepped toward the table. Ruth set the heated folder against the wood between them. A brown scorch appeared, sharp enough to carry the smell of warning. "Show me Ambrose's written authority." Silas stopped. "The auctioneer will bring all the authority you require. In 10 days. You came today." For the first time, his expression slipped. His gaze moved to the hearth, the sunlight, and Ruth's leather tool roll. He understood what she had done. "Those women stole from your uncle," he said quietly. "Your father was foolish enough to hide their common books. Do not repeat his mistake." Ruth heard the phrase more clearly than the threat. Common books. He knew the mark and the names. Silas reached inside his coat. She raised the folder, and he brought out only a folded notice. He placed it beside the scorch. "The inn will be open for viewing on Thursday. If you obstruct entry, the locksmith will remove the door." He left by the yard. Ruth waited until his horse crossed the stone bridge before lowering her hand. The folder had cooled, but her fingers still shook around it. She barred the kitchen door and inspected the register as she would a damaged Bible. The brown calf cover had split at both joints. Its headbands were hand-sewn, the kettle stitch remained sound, and the rag paper leaves sat in 12 gatherings. No recent thread interrupted the original sewing. Whoever placed the writing there had done so before the book was bound. Ruth was 32, with dark brown hair that escaped every bonnet pin by midday. She had spent 16 years at a bench under her father's instruction. Thomas Bellamy had taught her to read a book from the spine inward. Thread, fold, stain, grain, paste, and pressure. A careless repair could destroy the history it meant to save. She turned the register toward the light. At the inner edge of the third gathering, one top fold remained unopened. The binder had missed it with the knife. A faint rust-colored stroke vanished into that sealed space. There was more writing inside the fold, where no later hand could have reached. Ruth wrapped the register in clean linen and hid it beneath the loose seat of the settle. Then she surveyed the Fox and Lantern with new purpose. The inn stood a mile outside the market town of Darnwick, on the old road between Morpeth and the northern hills. The spring of 1868 had been hard on neglected roofs. It was a broad, gray stone building with a coach arch at one end and 12 dark windows facing the road. 2 bedrooms had no glass. Rain had stained the east wall from parapet to cellar. In the stable range, 3 courses of slate had slipped above the loft. Ambrose had described it as an inheritance. The deed he sent after Thomas's death called it Ruth's sole portion, subject to arrears, a private mortgage, and every repair required by the parish. Bellamy Press, its presses, accounts, and contracts had gone to Ambrose under a partnership release bearing Ruth's name. She had never signed it. At noon, a cart stopped in the yard. The driver was broad through the shoulders, with a carpenter's rule tucked through his belt. He introduced himself as Kit Snaith and refused to enter until Ruth moved a fallen rain barrel away from the wall. "If that gutter comes down, it'll bring stone with it," he said. "I'd rather meet you without a chimney on my head." He had been sent by the parish surveyor to list urgent hazards. Ruth showed him the roof, the rotten gallery stair, and the cracked lintel above the taproom. Kit prodded a beam with his awl. "You can make the west rooms safe for £12. The stable roof will want twice that. The rest can wait if the weather does." Ruth had £6 8 her binding tools, and 3 dresses. "The weather has never waited for me. Neither will your creditor." He glanced at the viewing notice. "I do work for money, Mrs. Bellamy." "Miss Bellamy, then I've offended you before charging for it." "That's poor trade." She almost smiled. Instead, she offered him 6 pence to brace the loose gutter before leaving. He accepted, then noticed the scorched mark on the kitchen table. Someone else has inspected already. Someone who did not knock. Kit looked toward the road. "Crew?" Ruth did not answer. His guess was answer enough. That afternoon she went through every drawer, shelf, and cupboard. Most held mouse droppings or dead wasps. The inn accounts ended in 1857, 1 year after the 6 women left the press. A rate book showed that rents from 3 cottages behind the stable had once been paid at the Fox and Lantern. The next leaf had been cut out close to the sewing. In the loft above the coach stalls, Ruth found rows of small iron holes along 2 beams. They stood at equal intervals, too regular for harness pegs. Fine black fibers clung inside one hole. She teased them free with tweezers and rolled them between her fingers. Linen cord, waxed for sewing books. The loft had once held binding frames. When dusk reached the coach arch, Ruth returned to the kitchen. She warmed only the outer margin of the register, keeping the heat low and even. Beside Edith Rook's name appeared Brevier, 14 March 1856, and 8D. 5 more entries surfaced below it. Margaret Ives, Joan Turn, Susan Baird, Fanny Ord, and Helen Carr. At the foot of the page, the binder's mark appeared again. It resembled an open book, crossed by a short key. Beneath it rose 3 words that Silas had nearly explained. Measure and sewing. Ruth copied the entries, let the leaf cool, and listened to the wind rubbing slate against slate above the old loft. 10 days was no longer the time left before she lost to ruin. It was the time left to learn why Ambrose feared a blank book. The Darnwick Mechanics Institute occupied 2 rooms above a cooper's shop. Its librarian, Tobias Fenwick, wore sleeve protectors polished at the elbows and distrusted anyone who entered with tools. "Repairs happen in Newcastle," he told Ruth. "They return with bills large enough to bind the building. I want to examine 6 books, not repair them. That is what people say before they produce a knife." Ruth laid the copied names and type sizes on his desk. She did not mention the heated writing. Bellamy Press printed reading books in these faces during 1855 and 1856. "I need the accession ledger." Fenwick studied her charcoal wool dress, plain bonnet, and leather binder's apron. "Ambrose Bellamy asked the same question yesterday. Did you answer?" "I told him our readers were in use. He offered to replace every old edition with his new series." And remove the old ones? He was very clear about that. The accession ledger listed 87 Bellamy volumes. 6 had arrived between March and November, 1,856, each in a different type size. They were called Common Lessons for Grown Readers, though the title pages credited Thomas Bellamy and 2 male editors. Fenwick found 4 on the shelves. One was on loan to a pit deputy. Another had been missing since 1861. The Brevier volume was small and heavily used. Its brown cloth had faded at the corners. Ruth placed it in a cradle and opened the front cover less than 45 degrees. "You will see more if you open it flat," Fenwick said, "and break the inner hinge." He bent closer. Ruth angled a mirror beneath the lifted edge of the pastedown. In the narrow reflection appeared the open book and key mark. Beside it, 4 shallow impressions ran across the board. "Sewing supports," she said. 4 should show along the spine. Only 2 do. Fenwick looked from the board to the spine. "Where are the others?" "Hidden beneath the cloth or cut before casing." "I cannot know without opening it." He withdrew the book. "Then we will remain ignorant." Ruth understood his caution. Old lending books often survived their best-intentioned rescuers by luck alone. She asked for a sheet of thin paper and made a rubbing of the impressions without touching the pastedown. 4 marks emerged. The outer pair aligned with the visible cords. The inner pair sat close together, like the supports used to guard a single inserted leaf. The volume had been built around something its title page did not admit. Fenwick's resistance softened into interest. He fetched a Pica edition and watched Ruth compare its sewing. It carried the same hidden pair, spaced differently. The date in the accession ledger matched Susan Baird's entry in the Guestbook. The pence figure matched the price Fenwick's predecessor had recorded as a subscriber's contribution. "These were not gifts from Bellamy Press," Ruth said. "People paid for them here, in pennies. Most of our first members paid a penny each Saturday." Fenwick turned back several pages. "The press invoice says the editions were donated by Thomas Bellamy." Ruth knew her father's neat, compressed hand. The signature beneath the invoice was his. His account made the women vanish, yet his binder's mark kept directing her toward them. "May I bring a sewing frame tomorrow?" she asked. "You may bring your hands. The book stays intact." Before she left, Fenwick opened the Institute's cupboard of withdrawn volumes. The shelf for Bellamy Press was empty, except for a torn paper label. Fresh dust showed where books had rested until recently. "Who removed those?" Ruth asked. Fenwick's mouth tightened. "Mr. Crewe had a letter from our treasurer. I thought he took only the new duplicates." Ruth examined the torn label. Its lower edge had been sliced with a knife ground sharper on one side, the sort pressmen used for trimming frisket. Silas carried such a knife. Outside, a Bellamy press cart waited across the street. Its driver saw Ruth and snapped the reins. Ambrose was collecting the common books before she could read their sewing. Ruth returned to the Fox and Lantern by the footpath, saving the coach fare. Kit had braced the gutter with a timber prop and left a scrap of paper pinned beneath the kitchen latch. "West wall safe. East loft isn't. Do not trust the blue door." The blue door stood at the end of the stable gallery. Ruth had assumed it opened into a feed cupboard. Its lower panel was swollen, and a cabinet of rotting tack blocked half its width. When she tested the latch, the whole frame moved away from the wall. It was a shallow door fixed across a deeper opening. She stopped herself from pulling it. Kit's warning was practical, not mysterious. The floorboards nearby sagged toward the coach stalls. Opening the door without support might bring the lintel down. That night, she slept in the kitchen with the register under her mattress. Rain struck the loose slates in short bursts. Twice, she heard feet in the yard, and found only a gray pony nosing weeds between the stones. At dawn, customers arrived. Fenwick had told the cooper that Ruth could mend books. The cooper brought a family Bible with a detached board. A schoolmistress brought 12 copybooks that needed new covers. A farmer asked whether she repaired leather account cases and seemed disappointed when she said yes, because he had prepared a long explanation of why no woman could. Ruth worked at the kitchen table. She lifted old leather rather than replacing it, toned thin repair paper with walnut stain, and resewed the copybooks on fresh linen. By evening she had earned 11 shillings and promises of more work. Kit returned with 2 lengths of used oak. He tested the blue doorway, crawled beneath the gallery, and emerged with cobwebs in his hair. "There's a second beam behind the wall," he said. "Someone boxed it over. Give me a day and 3 men. I can afford half a man. Then hold the lamp and do exactly what I say. Then for the lamp and do exactly what I say." They shored the gallery with the used oak. Ruth cleared the tack cabinet while Kit eased the false frame forward. Behind it lay a narrow stair climbing into darkness above the loft ceiling. The air smelled of dry paste, leather, and old soot. "That space is not on the parish plan," Kit said. "It was built inside the roof pitch. An inspector measuring from below would miss it." Ruth climbed 6 steps and stopped at a low landing. Iron racks lined the walls. A sewing frame stood folded beneath sacking, its cords still attached. 3 binding presses had been dismantled and laid between the rafters. The people who left had protected every screw with tallow. On a workbench sat a row of cloth-bound books, each with wide margins, clear type, and flexible joints designed for repeated repair. A laborer with weak sight could open one flat without forcing the spine. Ruth had made similar choices in private commissions and been told they wasted cloth. Here, someone had made them 12 years earlier. Kit lifted a narrow booklet. Every wage entry showed hours, rate, deductions, and the worker's own receipt mark. "I could have used this when I apprenticed. So could everyone." The room held no gold and no grand press. Its value lay in ordinary things, made unusually fair. Readable contracts, repairable primers, illustrated safety sheets, and small passbooks that left no room for a master to invent a deduction. Years of soot had disguised how carefully the place was built. The workbench stood beneath a north-facing roof light, giving steady illumination without direct sun. A narrow brick flue from the taproom chimney kept the air dry. Tin-lined cupboards protected paper from mice, while shallow drawers allowed damp cloth to be removed before mold reached a whole stack. Whoever arranged the room understood that useful books depended on uneventful habits. Paper had to stay dry. Thread had to be strong enough for repeated opening. Paste had to hold, yet soften when a later binder needed to lift it. Ruth recognized several small economies her father had taught her. Worn calf from account books had been pared and reused at the corners. Offcuts of stout paper reinforced the joints. Discarded type wrappers had become labels inside the drawers. None of it matched the story of women carrying valuable material from Bellamy Press. The room showed people saving what the business considered beneath notice. Ruth opened a trial reader. 2 false cords showed along its inner joint. Between them, a narrow paper guard had been sewn into the first gathering. Most of the guarded leaf was concealed beneath the pastedown. She moistened a bone folder with steam from the lamp kettle and lifted 3 inches of old paste. Writing appeared in a woman's hand, one of 6 counterparts. Property held for common rooms, instruction, and paid work. The rest disappeared beneath the board. Kit read over her shoulder. "Is that a deed?" "It is a clause. Without names, signatures, and a proper counterpart, it proves intention." Id. That sounds like a solicitor's way of saying no. It is a binder's way of saying we have 5 more leaves to find. A horse entered the yard below. Ambrose called Ruth's name from the coach arch as if he had come to congratulate her. Kit covered the trial books with sacking. Ruth descended, closing the false door behind her. Ambrose stood in the tap room wearing a dove-gray coat suited to a Newcastle office. He was 40, smooth-shaven, and careful with every public courtesy. Beside him waited Silas, and a heavy man Ruth knew only as the auctioneer. "You have made the place almost respectable," Ambrose said. "That will help the viewing. Your clerk has already viewed my kitchen." Silas pinched one cuff. Ambrose did not look at him. "I came to spare you embarrassment," Ambrose said. "The mortgage holder will accept £18 and release you from the balance if you sign today." He laid a paper on the bar. In return for £18, Ruth would surrender the inn, its yard, every fixture, and all papers found on the premises. The buyer was a company registered 3 weeks earlier. Silas had witnessed its incorporation. "Why does a bankrupt inn require its waste paper listed?" she asked. "Because you have started imagining value where there is none." "Then omit the papers." Ambrose's pleasant face hardened. "Your father indulged 6 dishonest women and nearly lost our press. I will not allow his shame to become a public spectacle." Ruth thought of the readable wage books above them. "Who taught you to call fairness dishonest?" The auctioneer shifted his weight. Ambrose lowered his voice. "Come back to Bellamy Press. I will give you a bench and 30 shillings a week. You may bind as much as you like. Sign the release, and this ends." 30 shillings was more than Ruth had earned during her final year, when Ambrose put her wages into a family account she could not inspect. The offer landed where he intended. A warm room, regular work, and no creditor at the door had once seemed enough for a life. "Will the books carry my name?" she asked. "Customers buy Bellamy books. There are 2 Bellamys in this room. Only one printer." Ruth folded his release through the middle and returned it. "Then, that printer can leave." Ambrose stared at the crease. He was unaccustomed to seeing his paper altered. "Thursday's viewing will proceed," he said. "Anything unsafe will be removed before the public enters. Mr. Pyle has that authority." The auctioneer gave a curt nod. Ruth realized why Ambrose had brought him. This was another search, conducted under the name of safety. After they left, Kit came down from the gallery. "He knew you'd found something. He knew before I did." Ruth spent the remaining daylight making a record of the upper workroom. Fenwick arrived with a camera borrowed from a surveyor, an unwieldy box that required long exposures. They photographed the racks, the presses, and each object before moving anything. Kit numbered the boards in chalk. Fenwick signed the inventory and complained whenever Ruth's lamp threatened his plates. The 6 trial readers differed in type and size. Each corresponded to one guestbook entry, but only 2 remained in the workroom. The others had gone into circulation. Ruth exposed the guarded leaf in the breviary trial, without lifting more paste than necessary. It named Edith Rook as one of 6 subscribers and referred to a declaration lodged with Armstrong and Vale, solicitors of Collingwood Street, Newcastle. The second leaf named Margaret Ives and described the Fox and Lantern, its cottage rents, and the coachyard income as property to be held apart from Bellamy Press. "Armstrong and Vale closed years ago," Fenwick said. "Vale died. Armstrong went to Edinburgh. Their papers must have gone somewhere, or into a stove." Ruth covered the books again. The hidden clauses were useful because they had been sewn into the original structures. They were also unsigned fragments under her own roof. Ambrose would call them inventions. They needed a book whose custody he could not question. Fenwick sent a boy to the pit deputy for the loaned Pica volume. Ruth and Kit searched the inn, accounts for the other accession destinations. A penciled note beside Edith Rook's 8 gave an address in Morpeth. The entry was 12 years old, yet the name remained on the borough rate list. Ruth left before sunrise the next morning. She took the register wrapped beneath her coat and spent 4 on the 3rd-class train, then walked from Morpeth station to a row of brick cottages behind a rope walk. 2 men were carrying a chest through Edith Rook's door. An elderly woman stood in the passage, one hand fixed around the newel post. She was small, white-haired, and dressed for company, although the hem of her black gown had been darned with blue thread. Put it down, Ruth said. The larger man turned. Who are you? The person asking to see your warrant. He produced a rent claim from a property agent. Edith owed £3, 2 shillings. The agent had agreed to accept her books, sewing frame, and chest in settlement. At the bottom appeared the name of the agent's principal, A. Bellamy. He bought this row last month, Edith said. Her voice was dry and exact. He has discovered a sudden interest in my furniture. The men offered Ruth a private bargain. £3, 6 shillings would clear the claim and their fee. Otherwise, they would continue. Ruth possessed £5, 15 shillings after her first binding work, the used oak and fresh supplies. Kit required £2 for roof braces before Thursday. The parish rates demanded another £1 within the week. Paying Edith's arrears would leave the east loft exposed. She looked at the chest. A brevier reader lay beneath its half-open lid. Ambrose expected her to buy the evidence and leave the woman. The debt is hers, Ruth told the men. The books are hers. Write a receipt in her name. She counted 3 sovereigns, 4 shillings, and 2 sixpences onto the hall table. The larger man tested each coin against his teeth. When they left, he carried nothing except the receipt stub. Edith did not thank Ruth. She closed the front door and studied her face. Thomas's girl, she said at last. You have his hands. Ruth glanced down. Paste had dried white along her thumbnail. Did my father help you hide the books? Your father helped bind them. Hiding came later. Edith made tea so weak that the bottom of the cup remained visible. On the table, she placed her common lessons volume and a cloth wage book. Every payment in the wage book matched an entry that Ruth warmed in the guest register. We were 6 binders, compositors, and press feeders, Edith said. Bellamy Press printed expensive school books. Grown laborers got cast-off sermons in type too small to follow after a shift. We designed readers they could afford, and passbooks their employers could not muddle. My uncle accused you of stealing type. We bought worn type by weight and cast what we lacked. Your uncle wanted the orders after 2 institutes asked for a second run. He dismissed us, kept the designs, and told the trade we were thieves. Thomas had objected, but he was the younger brother and owed money to the firm. He saved the trial bindings and marked each with the open book and key. The Fox and Lantern's former owner, a childless coach widow named Grace Nairn, gave the 6 women rooms for work. Later, she settled the inn and 3 cottages on their common venture. Why place clauses inside the books? Ruth asked. Grace trusted solicitors. We trusted copies. Edith tapped the cloth cover. A deed can be locked away. 6 books go 6 directions. The complete declaration had been lodged with Armstrong and Vale. Each hidden leaf identified the deposit and preserved 1 clause. The guestbook recorded the members' contributions in sympathetic ink because Grace feared Bellamy men would search ordinary accounts. When warmed, it also identified which type size belonged to each woman. Did the ink always fade? In damp weather, yes. Fanny learned the mixture from a dyer. We thought it clever. Edith gave a rueful shrug. Clever things become nuisances when everyone who understands them grows old. Only Edith survived. She had kept her reader unopened because Thomas warned that lifting the pastedown badly would tear the guarded leaf. Ruth placed the book in a cushion and examined its sewing. The thread was browned, undisturbed, and locked through the guard before the boards were attached. In the paper lay a watermark from a mill that closed in 1857. The guarded clause named Edith and stated that management rights passed to surviving subscribers, then to workers chosen under the declaration. It did not give Ruth ownership. It gave Edith standing to demand the original deed. Come to Darnwick, Ruth said. Edith looked around her bare room. I left that inn with men at the gate, calling me a thief. Then return with your own book. Edith ran 1 finger over its frayed corner. You paid my rent when you could have bought my chest for less. I am tired of Bellamy's profiting when a woman has no good choice. For the first time, Edith smiled. Very well. Let us inconvenience your cousin. They reached the Fox and Lantern after dark. Kit met them under the coach arch with bad news. Without the money for braces, he had closed the gallery. A forecast of high wind had arrived from the station. He could protect the workroom with tarpaulins, though he could not make the roof safe. Ruth told him where the money had gone. I won't say you chose wrong, he replied. The roof won't care. That was the entire cost of the decision, stated without comfort. The pit deputy had returned the Pica reader to Fenwick, its guarded leaf named Susan Baird, and required profits from the readers to support instruction rooms and paid training. The Institute had held the volume since 1856. Its accession, loans, and repairs formed an unbroken record. By midnight, Ruth had 3 independent books: Edith's, the Institute's, and the trial volume from the loft. Their clauses overlapped at the edges. Together, they named the trust's purpose, property, and deposit. The bindings also revealed what had happened after the women were dismissed. Later editions from Bellamy Press copied the flexible joints and large type, but removed every subscriber mark. Ambrose still sold those editions to collieries, factories, and adult schools. The current catalog called the construction the Bellamy Practical Binding. Ruth laid an old and new reader side by side. A peculiar flaw crossed the lowercase g in both. The worn sort had left a hairline notch in 1856. A stereotype plate made from that setting had carried the flaw into every later printing. He has earned from their original forms for 12 years, Fenwick said, and he came for the old books because they prove who made them first. Edith opened the wage book to a page headed Cottage Rents. Payments ended in September 1856, but parish rate charges continued under the Fox and Lantern. Someone had collected the income while allowing the inn debt to grow. Kit took a folded paper from his pocket. A railway surveyor asked me to price demolition here last spring. I kept his sketch because he never paid. The sketch showed a proposed goods spur stopping at the coach yard. A note in the margin required vacant possession and clear title before the end of the month. Ambrose did not want the inn. He wanted the land beneath it, together with 12 years of missing rents and the profits of work he had renamed. Ruth slept 2 hours, then traveled to Newcastle with Edith and Fenwick. They found Armstrong and Vale's old office occupied by a seed merchant. A brass plaque in the passage listed the successor firm: Loudon, Kerr, and Blyth. Mr. Jasper Loudon received them in a room filled with tin deed boxes. He was a stooped solicitor with eyebrows that seemed permanently surprised. Armstrong's deposits came to us in 1862, he said. Some were transferred to a bank. Some had no living client and remain uncatalogued. Edith gave her name. Loudon searched a handwritten index and found one line: Nairn, Grace Common Book Rooms Packet 44. The packet was held in the deed vault of Tyne and District Bank. Its release required a court order or 2 recognized trustees. Edith was one. The second line named Thomas Bellamy. My father died in January, Ruth said. Then his executor may act, if the declaration permits. Ambrose is the executor. Loudon closed the index. That complicates the key without changing the lock. He agreed to certify the entry and petition for the packet if they produced evidence that Ambrose's interest conflicted with the trust. The process normally took weeks. Ruth had 4 days. At the bank, an assistant allowed them to inspect the deposit ledger without opening the vault. Packet 44 had been lodged on the 3rd of November 1856. Annual cottage rents entered the trust account until 1859. After that, the deposits continued under the same amounts but were credited to Bellamy Press. The transfer instruction bore Thomas's name. Ruth bent over it until the clerk coughed. That is my father's hand, she said. Edith's face went still. Ruth examined the page again. Thomas had written the words, but the instruction continued onto a narrow strip pasted over the original line. The strip directed funds to the press. Its downstroke crossed old binding thread at the ledger's gutter without staining it. This strip was added after the ledger was sewn, Ruth said. The writing beneath it must be examined. The assistant pulled the book away. Only under an order. Loudon looked more awake than before. That, he said, may be the conflict we require. They filed a petition at the county court office and paid 9 shillings in fees. Loudon advanced the rest against any recovery, making Ruth sign a careful account. The registrar set an urgent hearing for Friday morning, hours before the auction. When Ruth returned to Darnwick, an official notice had been nailed to the blue door. The mortgage holder claimed all removable fixtures in the stable range and authorized Mr. 3 Pyle to take lead, iron, and saleable timber before the public viewing. Silas stood in the yard with 6 laborers and a ladder. "You should have accepted £18, he said. Ruth read the notice twice. It permitted removal of fixtures already listed in the mortgage schedule. It did not identify which fixtures they were. "Show me the schedule," she said. Silas signaled the men toward the stable roof. "Apply to the creditor." Kit planted himself at the ladder. Mr. Pyle, red-faced from the climb up the lane, ordered him aside. "That lead is part of the weathering," Kit said. "Strip it in this wind, and the rafters will lift. It has a salvage value. So does a coffin. You needn't build one here." Pyle threatened to have him charged with obstruction. Ruth could not risk Kit's livelihood. She made him stand down, then demanded that Pyle write every item in an inventory. Edith and Fenwick witnessed it. Ruth carried the guestbook beneath her apron and moved the 3 documented readers into the stone dairy. The men took iron fireplace backs, 2 copper cisterns, and the lead flashing along the stable ridge. Silas directed them without consulting a list. He knew precisely which roof covered the old workroom. One laborer hesitated beside an iron strap joining a rafter to the end wall. "This? A fixture? Take it," Silas said. Kit swore and ran for the ladder. The first bolt came free with a snap. A gust pressed beneath the exposed slates. The east roof rose a hand's breadth, settled, then twisted toward the yard. "Everyone out!" Ruth shouted. The men scrambled down. Kit dragged the youngest clear as the upper masonry gave way. Rafters struck the gallery and punched through its floor. The false blue door burst outward. Binding frames, boards, and bundles of paper fell into the stalls under a white cloud of lime. For several seconds, the yard held no sound except loose slate breaking on stone. Kit sat against the pump with blood on one palm. The cut was shallow. Ruth bound it with a strip torn from her petticoat, then counted every person twice. Silas had disappeared. So had the chest containing the 2 trial readers and the old wage forms. Pyle stared at the open roof. "I did not authorize removal of a structural tie. You authorized men to work without a schedule," Ruth said. "Write that in your inventory." Rain began before sunset. The hidden workroom could not be saved. Fenwick's photographs and their signed list survived in the dairy, along with the 3 books whose history did not begin under Ruth's roof. Ambrose had destroyed the place that connected the pieces, then stolen what remained there. Ruth stood in the wreckage and understood what he had failed to take. Edith still had her home, her reader, and her voice. The Institute volume still carried 31 years of loans. Her costly choice in Morpeth had placed the strongest evidence beyond his reach. Under a fallen press cheek, Kit found a brass binder's stamp. Its face bore the open book and key. Around the edge ran 6 tiny initials. Ruth cleaned it with a dry brush. This made the marks beneath the pastedowns. Can it prove who used it? Only beside the books and the register. Then we had better keep them beside each other. People who had brought work to Ruth arrived with tarpaulins, ropes, and lanterns. The cooper said he came to protect his Bible from the rain. The schoolmistress made no excuse. Even the farmer who doubted women binders brought a wagon cover, though he instructed Ruth twice on how to tie it. They sheltered the west rooms and shored the coach arch. No one pretended the inn was repaired. By midnight, it was merely less likely to lose another wall. Loudon arrived at dawn with a court messenger and packet 44. The urgent order permitted the deed deposit and bank ledger to be produced under seal at the hearing. It also restrained further removal until the court heard both claims. Ambrose answered with an allegation of fraud. He said Ruth had manufactured hidden papers in a condemned inn, persuaded an old debtor to pose as a trustee, and damaged the roof to delay a lawful sale. He produced the partnership release bearing Ruth's signature as proof that she had no interest in Bellamy Press. Loudon obtained permission for her to inspect it in the clerk's presence. The release occupied the final leaf of Thomas Bellamy's partnership minute book. At first glance, the sewing looked undisturbed. Ruth placed the book upright and opened it only far enough to see the gutter. The final leaf had no conjugate half in the preceding gathering. It was a single sheet, tipped to a paper stub, and disguised beneath fresh paste colored with soot. A chain line ran the wrong direction. Its watermark belonged to the stock Bellamy Press purchased after Thomas died. "My signature was written before this page entered the book," Ruth said. Loudon frowned. "How can you know that? The last stroke disappears under the stub. Whoever pasted it in trimmed the name to fit." The clerk recorded the defect. A bank search found no payment of the £25 the release claimed Ruth had received. Ruth spent the remaining hour making plain labels for every exhibit. She resisted the urge to arrange them as a binder arranged a handsome volume. A court needed each object to stand alone before anyone joined the pieces. Fenwick numbered his photographs. Edith wrote the 6 names from memory, then checked her spelling against the wage book. Kit drew the stable roof and marked the iron tie Silas ordered removed. Loudon placed the railway option last because motive could explain conduct, though it could not create title. The register remained closed until the hearing. Ruth kept it in its linen wrapper and recorded each person who touched it. She also tested her heated folder on a blank rear leaf, where it left no color or mark. The demonstration would need to be simple enough for people unfamiliar with bindings to follow. If she rushed, Ambrose would call skill a trick. If she explained too much, the important fact would vanish among trade terms. At 9 on Friday morning, the benches of Darnwick County Court filled with townspeople, institute members, press workers, and 3 men from the railway company. Mr. Pyle sat alone near the door. Ambrose arrived with Silas and a Newcastle barrister. Ruth wore her charcoal dress and no apron. Without the leather across her waist, she felt as though she had come without armor. The metal folder lay in her tool roll beside the wrapped guestbook. Judge Wetherell began with the narrow question of whether the auction could pass a clear title. Ambrose's barrister argued that the trust was a story assembled from worthless books. Loudon answered with custody, construction, and accounts. Fenwick testified first. He produced the Institute accession ledger and the Pica reader. It had entered public custody in 1856 and never belonged to Ruth. Its guarded clause was exposed under the court clerk's observation. The original sewing thread passed through the guard and locked beneath an intact headband. "Could Miss Bellamy have inserted that leaf this week?" the barrister asked. Fenwick adjusted his sleeve protector. "She could also have built Durham Cathedral this week. Both would leave evidence of haste." Laughter moved through the rear bench. The judge stopped it, though his mouth tightened at one corner. Edith followed. She named the 6 women, described their work, and identified her wage book. Ambrose's barrister asked why she had remained silent for 12 years. "I spoke," Edith said. Men who bought printing from Bellamy Press preferred his answer. "And Miss Bellamy purchased your testimony by paying your rent? She could have purchased my books for less. Your client arranged that. Ask him why." Mr. Pyle then admitted that Silas had directed the roof removal without producing the mortgage schedule. Kit's survey established that the iron strap was structural. Fenwick's photographs showed the workroom before its collapse, while the brass stamp matched impressions beneath pastedowns in all three surviving readers. The railway agent produced Ambrose's option. £480 would be paid for the coachyard if he delivered unchallenged title by the end of the month. The agreement explained his new company, the rushed auction, and his interest in a place he publicly called worthless. Loudon opened packet 44. Inside lay Grace Nairn's executed declaration, a property schedule for the Fox and Lantern and its cottages, and 6 subscription slips. The deed required the income to fund common reading rooms and paid work for women in printing and binding. Each hidden book clause matched one section of the deposited declaration. None supplied the whole document alone. The 6 subscription slips carried the same names recorded in Edith's wage book. Ambrose's barrister objected that the Guestbook was Ruth's recent invention and should not be admitted, even as supporting evidence. Ruth took the witness chair. The register contains 12 gatherings sewn on 4 linen supports, she said. The thread is continuous from the first leaf to the last. The head and tail knots remain under the original boards. A skilled binder can imitate old sewing, the barrister said. A skilled binder knows when imitation will fail. At the judge's direction, a clerk brought a shaded spirit lamp. Ruth warmed the metal folder and passed it above the first written page without touching the paper. Rust-colored names appeared. The courtroom grew quiet as Edith Rooke, Margaret Ives, Joan Turn, Susan Baird, Fanny Ord, and Helen Carr wrote themselves into view. Beside each name stood a type, size, date, and payment. Loudon matched those details to the accession ledger, wage book, and 6 subscription slips. The pence were the women's recorded shares, small enough that men had mistaken them for ordinary inn charges. Ambrose rose halfway from his seat. She copied those figures from the packet. The packet was sealed until this morning. Loudon said, "My father may have shown her an abstract." Ruth placed the register in its cradle. "There is writing inside an unopened fold in the 3rd gathering. No one could copy it after binding without cutting the leaf." Judge Wetherell examined the sealed top edge. He ordered the clerk to open it with Ruth's paper knife while the court watched. Inside, the hidden line was pale until Ruth passed the warm folder above it. The words named Packet 44, Armstrong and Vale, and the 6-member trust. They also instructed the holder to compare the sewing of the common readers. The barrister asked whether sympathetic ink could have been introduced through the edge of the fold. Ruth showed where the writing crossed from one inner page to the other. Beneath the crease, it was placed on the sheet before folding. The book was then gathered, sewn, rounded, and bordered around it. She explained the paper watermark, the aged paste, and the binder's stamp. She also showed the lowercase g flaw shared by the 1856 reader and Bellamy Press's current catalog. Ambrose had continued printing from a stereotype descended from the women's setting. The bank ledger supplied the money trail. Under the pasted strip, the clerk revealed Thomas's original instruction. Rents were to remain to the trust's order. The added strip diverted them to Bellamy Press. Its ink passed over paper that had been manufactured 3 years after the original entry. Finally, the court examined Ruth's supposed partnership release. The tipped leaf, later watermark, trimmed signature, and missing bank payment turned Ambrose's claim of ownership into another question he could not answer. Judge Wetherell did not give a speech. He restrained the auction, recognized the trust's prior claim to the inn, and ordered the cottage rents and reader profits into an independent account. Bellamy Press could not dispose of its presses or contracts until the partnership and trust accounts were examined. The altered records and the roof removal were referred for further inquiry. Ambrose stood very still while the clerk read the order. His private fear had never been an old inn. It was comparison. One book could be dismissed, one woman discredited, and one account altered. 6 records in separate hands left him nowhere to move the truth. Outside, Silas tried to leave by the side passage. A constable stopped him because the stolen chest had been found in the Bellamy Press cart behind the court. The 2 trial readers were still inside. Ruth watched them return the chest to Edith's care. She felt no triumph large enough to erase the previous years. What she felt was steadier. Her work had been called decorative, secondary, and female. That morning, the way a book had been made determined whose account the law believed. The orders settled nothing quickly. For 4 months, accountants traced rents from the cottages and fees from 23 editions. Ambrose contested every total. The partnership release was set aside, and Ruth recovered her share of Bellamy Press. The court charged Ambrose's remaining interest with repayment to the trust. He lost management of the business, and the railway option expired before he could offer clean title. Silas admitted taking the chest and directing the removal of the iron strap. His evidence reduced his penalty, though it did not return him to respectable employment. Mr. Pyle paid for part of the emergency shoring, and thereafter demanded a written schedule before touching so much as a hinge. Edith convened the surviving trust under Loudon's supervision. She could have placed everything in Ruth's hands. Instead, she insisted on an elected board of workers, institute members, and cottage tenants. "We tried trusting a family name once," she said. "You are right," Ruth answered. They appointed Ruth as paid superintendent of the Fox and Lantern bindery and manager of the recovered press share. Her first account showed her own wage on the same line as everyone else's. Repairs took 18 months. Kit rebuilt the stable roof with new ties before laying a single slate. Masons secured the east wall, glaziers replaced the bedroom windows, and the old presses returned to the loft only after an engineer approved the floor. The inn reopened 4 rooms at first. Coach and carrier traffic paid for the next 4. Nothing was restored from a single payment. The trust recovered part of the diverted rents in installments. Printing orders covered weekly wages, while room charges bought slate and lime. Ruth posted every account in the tap room on the first Monday of each month. When a roof estimate rose, the apprentices saw which repair weighted. When a reader sold well, they saw what portion returned to its compositor, binder, and instruction fund. The figures attracted arguments, mistakes, and long meetings. They also prevented one confident voice from quietly becoming the whole business. The restored workroom produced large print readers, plain language wage books, and safety sheets with illustrations that could be understood beside a noisy machine. Every volume carried the makers' and compositors' names. Ruth taught apprentices to resew a damaged text block instead of throwing it away. Edith taught them how to read an account that appeared to balance too neatly. Fenwick moved the Institute's evening class into the old tap room twice a week. Some laborers came to learn letters. Others came because the room was warm and stayed to follow a page. The 3 cottages were repaired over the following summer. Their rents entered the trust account where any member could inspect them. The town did not change its mind all at once. 2 merchants continued calling the place Bellamy's Folly until the new passbooks exposed errors in their own wage deductions. The farmer who had doubted Ruth's hands became a regular customer and never apologized. He did, however, bring every account book to her before its hinges broke. Ruth kept the old Guestbook in a glazed case away from the hearth. Once each year, the 6 names were warmed into view for the trust meeting, then allowed to fade. The process no longer had to carry the entire burden of proof. It had led them to records that ordinary daylight could hold. On the first clear morning of the second autumn, a carrier's cart waited beneath the repaired coach arch. Kit loaded 2 oak lending chests for villages beyond the hills. Their brass clasps bore the 6 women's names in letters large enough to read without turning the boxes toward the light. A new apprentice named May Telford brought Ruth the current inn register. She was 17, ink-stained, and impatient with careful margins. "Where should I sign for the chests?" she asked. Ruth opened the book to a clean-ruled page, "Where everyone can see it." May wrote her full name, the date, the destination, and her wage for packing the order. She blotted the line and ran after the cart. Ruth stood beneath the arch as the wheels took the lending books north. Behind her, a sewing frame clicked in the loft, and cups sounded in the tap room. She closed the register on a fresh entry made in common ink, clear, before it ever met the sun.